Well, hello, lovers of freedom. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and here on my weekly Saturday night internet show. Nice to be back with you. Missed you the last couple weeks, but hey, it's good to be back and talk about ideas on liberty. And tonight I'm going to be talking about militarism, empire, and the road to tyranny and bankruptcy. And what a better time, better time to talk about militarism and the role of the military in American society and the road to tyranny and bankruptcy than what happened just this last Friday night with the budget deal, where there was this huge crisis in the Congress of, oh my gosh, is the government going to be shut down? And I mean, it was really quite laughable. The whole thing's just one great big joke. For one thing, the government was never going to be shut down. It was only like, I don't know, half of the bureaucrats were going to be called a non-essential and they were going to be sent home. But the other half, and especially those killing people in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere around the world, they weren't going to stop. And but the whole thing was just such a joke. And let me explain to you why it's such a joke. Of course, now they're both Democrats and Republicans portraying themselves as the big budget cutters, and the Republicans are saying this proves that we're not big spenders anymore, and well, this is idiocy. And let me explain it to you through an example of why it's such an inanity what they've done. Let's assume that your family has an income of $50,000 a year, and you're out spending money to the tune of about $250,000 a year. Okay, so you're spending 5 times the amount that you're bringing in, and you've been doing this for years. So you've mounted up a debt to the bank and the credit card companies and so forth of, let's say, about $3 million. And out of your $50,000 income, you're fighting desperately to keep up with the interest payments. Of course, you can't pay the principal. You just keep rolling over the principal, and it keeps mounting, and you're just using a bigger share of that $50,000 a year to pay the interest. Well, you know that the end is near. The bank's going to figure out what's going on. The credit card companies are going to figure out what's going on. And so you sit down with your wife and you say, okay, honey, we need to do something here. We need to resolve this, and we need to cut our spending here. And of course, your spouse says, well, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We really need to cut spending here. We're spending $250,000. We're only making $50,000. We've got debts of $3 million. We need to do some cutting. And so they form the parameters. The husband says, okay, well, I say we cut $20,000 from our spending. And the wife says, no, that's just too much. That's too painful. We've got to cut only $10,000 from the spending. And so there's this big family discussion and debates and arguments and so forth, and finally there's a compromise reached. Okay, $15,000 we're going to cut from our spending. So that means $250,000 of spending minus $15,000. So now it's at $235,000 of spending. They're bringing in $50,000. They got debts of $3 million plus the $235,000 excess spending that they're incurring this year. This is what they just did in Congress. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're spending $1.5 trillion more than what they're bringing in. And they're now saying, well, this proves we're not big spenders anymore because we cut, $60 billion or whatever from the $1.5 trillion deficit, the difference between what they're spending and bringing in. It's absolutely ludicrous. Now, did you see what happened with Portugal? Portugal is now going to the European Commission saying, oh, I need a bailout now too. Remember Greece? Remember how I've talked about Greece and how the U.S. government is headed toward the Greece-like atmosphere? I mean, remember in Greece they only have a welfare state, not a huge warfare state too like we have here in the United States. They spent out the gazoo. Oh, times were good. Remember when the Europeans would say, well, it just goes to show you that you can have a welfare state. A welfare state succeeds. And we libertarians have been saying for decades, it's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time that you have this plunderbund society, this leeching, taking from those who have in order to give to those that don't have, just keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking the private sector. It's like a great big parasite that sucks and sucks and sucks, and finally just the host just finally just collapses. And that's what's happened in Greece. The private sector cannot sustain the monumental expenditures of the welfare state, the transfer society, and it went belly up, couldn't pay its debts, just like that family. It incurred monumental debts, many of which were secret. They kept it secret from the Greek citizenry. And then when it finally came to light, everybody just outraged. Oh, well, people hitting the streets. We want our dole. We want our dole. Not realizing that the private sector is unable to handle, the interest on the debt, the principal on the debt, the dole, and so forth. And so, of course, they bailed out Greece. And the U.S. government was part of this operation, the way they funnel money into the International Monetary Fund, U.S. taxpayer money. And then there was Ireland, same situation. Now there's Portugal. It's saying, we can't pay our bills. We're going belly up. We need a bailout. Now, what's interesting about these bailouts is they actually just lend them the money. And so they're actually mounting debt on top of debt. They're not extinguishing their debt. So, all they're doing is just delaying the day of reckoning. Well, that's the situation that the United States is in. Now, we don't know how far down the road this is, but all we know is that it's down the road. That's the road that the U.S. government has taken our country, both with the welfare state and with the warfare state. I mean, they're combined. In Europe, it's mostly welfarism. Here we've got the double whammy. We've got the massive military spending. We've got the massive welfare state spending. And, of course, all the regulatory spending, the drug war being the most notable, but, all kinds of other kind of regulatory, SEC, Department of Labor, Energy, all the regulatory interventionist agencies, all the foreign aid to dictators, don't forget about that. So you've got this monumental spending problem, and they tinker with $60 billion on a deficit that's $1.5 trillion. Ridiculous. Absolutely inane. And where were all the Tea Party people? I thought the Tea Party people were there to, to really make a big difference, and of course they think they've made a big difference. Oh, wow, we cut spending by 40 billion or whatever the number is. Ridiculous. They need to slash 1.5 trillion. That's what they're spending, more than what they're bringing in. Now, that calls for some radical surgery. Yeah, but they got a radical disease. And, you might say, but Jacob, that means they might have to stop the occupation of Afghanistan. Yeah, it might very well mean that. Well, they might have to stop the occupation of Iraq. Yeah, it might mean that. They might have to abolish Social Security. It might mean that. Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it takes, they've got to slash what they're spending in excess of what they're bringing in. That's what a family would do. A family would slash not only, all the excess, they would actually slash more than the excess so that they can then start using part of that $50,000 to start paying down the principal of that debt. And do you think they're even in that mindset? Of course not. They play these games. It's all a facade. It's all, posturing for the next election. The Republicans want back in power. They want the largesse. They want the power that comes with the presidency. So they're posturing themselves, we're not big spenders anymore. We're not big spenders. Well, I say anymore because when George W. Bush was in power and all the Republican presidents before him, government spending was going out the gazoo. And, of course, Republicans didn't say anything about that because that was a Republican in charge and because they were receiving their largesse, their appointees, their bureaucrats, their recipients of the contracts from the military-industrial complex, or their recipients of the grants to the communities, or SBA loans, or whatever it is. This is what the welfare state and the warfare state do. I mean, they grant largesse. The IRS collects the money. The largesse goes out to those who are privileged enough to receive it. So it's really just a grab bag, a competition between Republicans and Democrats as to who's going to be in power, whose people are going to get the largesse. It's not a philosophical difference. It's not an ideological difference. Those of you that have been watching this show know that I've been saying from the beginning, there's not a dime's worth of difference between Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals. They believe in the welfare state. They believe in Social Security. They believe in Medicare and Medicaid and SBA loans and farm subsidies and grants and aid and foreign aid to dictators, and they believe in the warfare state. They believe in empire and intervention. They believe in these 700 to 1,000 military bases all over the world. They believe in a standing army. They believe in foreign interventionism and foreign wars and undeclared wars and omnipotent, unlimited power of the president and the U.S. government in foreign affairs. They believe in all these things. And so that's the problem we're facing. Now, it's kind of another laughable part of this whole thing about, oh, we've cut $60 billion from the budget, is what's going on in Libya. I mean, here's your warfare state in action. Here's your empire in action. And it really demonstrates that the Libyan intervention demonstrates that there really isn't a dime's worth of difference between liberals and conservatives. Now, granted, they'll come up with a different rationale for their interventions and their wars and so forth, but big deal. I mean, when George W. Bush ordered his army to attack Iraq, what did he say? WMDs, WMDs. Oh, Saddam Hussein is coming to get us. He's almost here. Mushroom clouds. Oh my gosh, we've got to do something now. We've got to attack Iraq. Right? Isn't that what he said? And then he says, but if you can't buy that, democracy's spreading, democracy's spreading. Well, it was ridiculous. But people bought into it because, you remember a few weeks ago I talked about deference to authority that's taught in the public schools and how, year after year, day after day, public school students are taught to defer to authority, to believe in their government officials, to be loyal to their government officials. They're the experts. Defer to authority. And how many times did we hear people during the build-up to the Iraq War saying, the president has access to information that we don't have. We have to trust him. We have to put our faith in the president. And, of course, Bush knew this, so he says, WMDs, WMDs. Well, why was he so certain that Saddam Hussein had WMDs? He had the receipts, because the U.S., along with other Western countries, had furnished Saddam back in the 80s WMDs when he was an ally, a partner of the U.S. empire, when they were using him to go after Iranians, after the Iranians had ousted the U.S. approved and installed Shah of Iran in their revolution. So, here you got Bush saying, oh, WMDs, WMDs. Well, it was really just a regime change operation. I mean, that's what the whole Iraq thing, that's what the sanctions were all about for, 11 years where they killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children. It was all about getting rid of Saddam and putting somebody in that will protect our interests. That's the way these things are always told. Our interests are at stake. Or, the other, meaningless term, national security. Oh, we got to get rid of Saddam because national security, What Obama has done is really no different in principle from what Bush has done and what all these presidents do, Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter. He's gone in there and he's waged a war of aggression. He's attacked a country that never attacked the United States. Neither the Libyan regime nor the Libyan people ever attacked our country. They're involved in a civil war. They're involved in a revolution. It's their business. But what does Obama say? Oh, we've got to attack. And where does he go to get permission to attack? He goes to these Arab nations, spends a lot of time there, he, negotiating with them. And he goes to the United Nations and says, please, please, give me authority to do this. Not one time does he go to the U.S. Congress, even though that's what the Constitution requires. Because Under our way of life, under the supreme law of the land, the law that we, the people, impose on federal officials, only Congress can declare war. The president cannot wage war without a congressional declaration of war. And so here you've got this guy, Obama, saying, what do I care what the Constitution says? I'm a commander-in-chief, and it's the same mindset that Bush had. I'm a commander-in-chief, I'm at war, and I can do whatever I want. The Constitution, it doesn't matter one iota. And so really, Obama's a lawbreaker. I mean, there's no question about that. And so was Bush. They're both law violators because the Constitution is the law. Now, that's not to say the Supreme Court's going to enforce it. Long ago, the Supreme Court understood that in foreign affairs, the presidents were not going to obey the Constitution. And rather than create a constitutional crisis and expose that, where the Supreme Court says, obey the Constitution, the Supreme Court said, we ain't getting involved because we don't want to expose the fact that the Constitution simply didn't work in this area, and then we got lawbreakers here. Because they knew the presidents weren't going to do what the Supreme Court said anyway. So if the Supreme Court issued a ruling that says, get out of Libya, you don't have the declaration of war, it requires it, they know the president would say, to heck with you, I ain't going to do what you're going to do. Send over your little army, Supreme Court, and let's see what you're going to do about it. So that's why the Supreme Court punted many decades ago with respect to foreign affairs. They bring up technicalities like, oh, well, citizens don't have standing to bring this up, or this is not a judiciable issue, or this is a political issue. It's all nonsense. It's a ruse that is designed to, disguise the fact that in foreign affairs there is no constitution. The president essentially has dictatorial powers. He has total powers to do whatever he wants. He wants to torture. He wants to attack countries willy-nilly. He wants to engage in foreign interventionism, rendition people, kidnap people. He can do whatever he wants. Execute people, assassinate people. I mean, there's essentially a dictatorship when it comes to foreign affairs. And it's really ironic that conservatives often say, we favor we favor limited government. We're advocates of limited government. But they favor the so-called Department of Defense, which is one of the most ridiculous named departments ever, because it's a department of empire and a department of war and aggressive war and wars of aggression and attacks on other countries and kidnappings and torture and assassinations and so forth. And it's unlimited government. So you have Republicans, conservatives, saying, I favor limited government, but I favor unlimited government in overseas matters. Well, if you have an unlimited government, you got an unlimited government. You can't say, well, yeah, but Jacob, it's limited over here. No, because if it's unlimited and there's an outlet for this unlimited power, that's unlimited government. And that's what conservatives stand for. It's what liberals stand for. So here you've got, Obama. Now, what's Obama saying about Libya? Oh, well, no, it's not a regime change operation. I'm different from George W. Bush. I'm a liberal. I'm concerned about the civilians. How ridiculous is that? I mean, that's got to be one of the most laughable lies I've ever seen. I mean, since when is Obama or any other U.S. official concerned about civilians in the Middle East? I mean, it's ridiculous. Don't forget, it's the U.S. government, including Obama, including the liberals, including the conservatives, that have been supporting these dictators, partnering with them, making sure that they stay in power. I mean, look at Egypt. The U.S. government giving $2 billion a year to Hosni Mubarak, a dictator, a very cruel and brutal dictator. That's why people finally ousted him. And then you've got the dictatorships in Bahrain. You've got the dictatorship in Yemen. You got all these kind of dictators. You had a dictator in Pakistan when Musharraf was in power. I mean, the U.S. government loves dictatorships. They've partnered with these evil institutions. They've supported these evil institutions because they believe in them. They believe in the order and stability that comes with these things. They're partners in the war on terror. Well, why are they cruel and brutal and evil dictatorships? Why are they considered that? It's because of what they've done to their own people. Rounding up people that said, we don't like this kind of way of life. We want democracy. We want economic prosperity. Go round them up. They're suspected terrorists, bring them in. They're suspected drug dealers, bring them in, torture them, incarcerate them indefinitely, maybe even execute them. That's what they're doing in Iran right now with that totalitarian regime. It's what they were doing in Egypt and in Bahrain, Yemen, all these areas that the U.S. government has supported. All right, now Iran, you say, oh, well, U.S. government's not supporting that totalitarian regime and what it's done to civilians in their country. Well, no, because it's not a member of the empire. But when the Shah of Iran was in charge, who, remember, the U.S. government put him in charge. They ousted, the U.S. government did, through the CIA, ousted the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. Imagine that, ousting a democratically elected official in another country. That's what the U.S. government did. And they did it secretly and surreptitiously, and then they install a dictator. Now, why? Because they wanted this dictator said, I'll be a member of the U.S. empire. I'll do what you need. And the U.S. government says, that's all we need to hear. You can do whatever you want to your own people, to civilians. And so, yeah, the Shah of Iran did the same thing that Hosni Mubarak did, the same thing that the totalitarian regime in Iran is doing today to civilians. Those that dissent, those that criticize are rounded up. Suspected terrorists, suspected drug dealers. They're brought in. They're taken to a dungeon. They're tortured. They're kept there indefinitely. If their mind becomes straight and they become loyal supporters of the dictatorship, they're released. If not, then they're kept there indefinitely, tortured indefinitely, perhaps even executed as a message to everyone else. This is the order and stability that comes with a U.S.-supported regime. And that's why, when Obama says, oh, I'm so concerned about the civilians in Libya, it's ridiculous. I mean, don't forget, this is the government that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children with the sanctions against Iraq. Did Obama ever criticize the sanctions? Has he ever condemned the sanctions? Of course not. Because this is a regime change operation. They were willing to kill those children in order to effect a regime change operation in Iraq, in order to get rid of Saddam and put their man in. And, that's why when Madeleine Albright, the official U.S. ambassador to the United Nations says, she was asked by 60 Minutes, is the death of 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions worth it? She says, well, yeah, it's a tough choice, but yeah, it's worth it. Well, you see, that's her mindset. The sacrifice of civilians in Iraq, in this case, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children, is worth trying to get rid of Saddam and putting our man in power. And then look at the support of these dictatorships: Egypt, Bahrain, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. These people oppress civilians. I mean, that's what makes them dictatorships. I mean, they're cruel, they're brutal, and their main goal is to remain in power. And of course, the U.S. government believes in this. They believe in these dictators. They don't give a hoot what they do to their people as long as they maintain order and stability. So, this notion of, oh, I'm born again, I'm President Obama, and I've got, a born-again concern for civilians in Libya, it's a laughable lie. This is a regime change operation once again. Obama, like Bush, saw an opportunity. Hey, here's an opportunity to oust a dictator that's not a loyal member of the empire. I mean, the dictator in Libya, Gaddafi, is not like Hosni Mubarak was, or the dictator in Bahrain or Yemen or Saudi Arabia. Tell us what you need, Mr. President. We'll do whatever you need. No, he's independent. He's an independent dictator like Castro, like Chavez. And so Obama says, I can portray the U.S. government as the defender of democracy, defender of civilians. Oh, this will be, great for the world. Well, it's really just for the American people. The people of the world see through this hypocrisy and double standards and so forth. It's really to try to cover up the U.S. government's longtime support of these dictatorships in the Middle East. That's embarrassing. I mean, it's been all over the news, you know, that the U.S. government is continuing to fund the military dictatorship in Egypt, the dictatorship in Bahrain, the dictatorship in Yemen, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. So what does Obama do? Oh, well, you know, I've got to get a message to all these public school graduates in America who were taught that the U.S. government is a lover of democracy and a lover of civilians and a lover of freedom. And so, boy, we're going to go in there and help civilians out. And, of course, you know, they're killing people, which that's their way of helping people. Now, the irony of this is that if any of these people in Libya, you know, wanted to come to the United States to flee what was going on there, Obama would say, hey, wait a minute. No way. We got immigration controls. We love you. We'll come and bomb for you. We'll kill on your behalf. And, well, we may sometimes kill you because the bombs drop sometimes in places we don't anticipate. But don't even think about coming and living with us because we don't love you that much. I mean, you know, it's essentially the message that Franklin Roosevelt, remember the great lover of the poor? I mean, isn't that what we're taught in the public schools that we all go to, you know? And the government-approved private schools as well, that Franklin Roosevelt was the great humanitarian, the lover of the poor, needy, and disadvantaged. Well, except for the Jews that were trying to escape Nazi Germany. When Hitler offered to let the Jews out of Germany, the U.S. government says, oh, no. And Franklin Roosevelt says, oh, we have the quota system here in the United States, and the quota has been reached. Yeah, like they couldn't go and get the quota lifted. And so, you know, the Jews end up staying in Germany. And there's that, you know, famous story of the Voyage of the Damned. You can Google that, Voyage of the Damned. Great movie on it, too, where that German cruise ship was headed toward Cuba, filled with Jewish refugees, and they wouldn't let them disembark there. And then they came to Miami, and one of the most shameful periods of American history, the U.S. government, led by the great humanitarian Franklin Roosevelt, said, no Jew is going to disembark. And they made sure, they surrounded this boat, and they made sure that no Jew jumped ship, and they said, go back to where you came from. You ain't going to come here. And so, you know, you've got these liberals portraying themselves like Obama and Roosevelt as the great lovers of the poor, the great lovers of the needy and stuff. But I'll guarantee you that if those Libyans said, Mr. President, we'd like to come to America, we want to get away from this dictatorship, Obama would take the same position that Franklin Roosevelt took. No, stay right where you are. We don't want you. We don't love you that much, but we'll send you bombs made in the USA. And of course, you know, when those Jews got returned, I mean, fortunately, that some of the European countries took them. England took some of them, and they didn't have to go back to Germany. But those that ended up on the continent, I think they probably died anyway, because soon thereafter, German forces went through France and so forth. So the possibility of survival was virtually non-existent. But this is all part and parcel of the hypocrisy that pervades both the liberals and the conservatives. They're statists to the core. And what I've said time and time again in this show, and in my writings and in the articles we publish at the Future of Freedom Foundation, this is not a battle between liberals and conservatives, you know, left and right. You see that in the mainstream media all the time. Left versus right. You know, let's see what the left says on this issue. Let's see what the right says on this issue. That is not the battle that we're facing. Our battle in America is between libertarianism and statism. And the statism is the conservatives and the liberals. They believe in all these interventions, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. I mean, the whole part and parcel of the whole warfare state they buy into. Now, they may have, you know, differences of, you know, whether this intervention should be okay or that intervention should be okay. But it's not a philosophical, it's not a principled objection. They believe in the warfare state. They believe in the welfare state. I mean, they can argue all day long about, you know, well, should Social Security retirement age be, you know, 68 instead of 71? And should Medicare expenses be, you know, X percent? But they believe in these programs. That's the thing that you need to keep in mind. They believe in the welfare state. Now, obviously, libertarians stand in a different position, especially with respect to not only the welfare state. I mean, we repeal all these programs. We believe in free markets. We believe in private property. But also the warfare state. And this is what distinguishes us in large part from both conservatives and liberals, from the statists, that we embrace the principles that essentially were set forth at our nation's founding. Now, what were those principles? Well, our founding fathers hated militarism. They hated a society that is so wrapped up with militarism, huge standing army, this air of gravitas that afflicts, empire officials. And I mean, you can see it in Washington. You kind of get the sense when you walk around Washington that you're like in the Roman Empire, at the height of the crises and so forth, where you've got all these military officials. You see it on TV during Obama's speeches, where the military is sitting there with this air of gravitas. Oh, the nation is at stake, and they're the only ones they're going to save the nation. And, well, our founding fathers didn't believe in this militarism. And you can see it in their writings. They said this is alien to what's going to be the America that we want. We don't want a militarist society. They rejected the idea of a big standing military force, a Pentagon, a military-industrial complex, an empire. They opposed the concept of empire, which, of course, is not surprising, given that the revolution was against their own government, which was an empire. Of course, today you've got bases all over the world, 700 to 1,000 in more than 130 countries. I mean, it's ridiculous. And of course, the states say, well, that isn't an empire. Oh, really? You've got military bases all over the world, 130 countries, 1,000 military bases, and you got secret prison camps around the world. You got troops everywhere. You got a navy everywhere. That is not what the founding fathers envisioned, and there were no there was no foreign aid, to dictators or to anyone else. There was no fighting to protect our interests abroad. There were no foreign wars. There were no undeclared wars. There was no foreign aid, foreign interventionism. I mean, this was a radically different way of life that America stood for. I mean, imagine that. Imagine a way of life where there's not all this militarism and Pentagon and war on terror and constant crises and so forth. That was the way of life that was embraced by our founding fathers. Oh, by the way, that is the way of life that is embraced by libertarians. I mean, this is one of the major things that distinguish us from conservatives and from liberals. That we don't believe in the warfare state, in the garrison state, the national security state. We reject all that. In fact, we say that is one of the roots of the problem here. It's not just the welfare state that's bankrupting America. It's the warfare state that's bankrupting America too. Oh, and by the way, it's not just the welfare state that moves toward tyranny, more control, more debasement of the currency, more infringements on economic freedom. The warfare state also is the road to tyranny, because as Madison said, when you've got perpetual war, perpetual crises, that is the enemy of liberty. I mean, if you want to destroy the freedom of your own country, then establish a great big empire, great big military-industrial complex, and have constant wars, constant interventions. That is the surefire recipe to tyranny. And so you've got the statists, conservatives and liberals, with their philosophy of the warfare state and the welfare state, that are leading our nation to bankruptcy. That's what I started by saying in this program, the financial bankruptcy. And you've got ever-increasing taxes, and you've got the debt, the borrowing, the inflation, because they're printing the money to pay for all these debts, so you can see that. Gold is soaring. Silver is absolutely skyrocketing. These are signs that prices across the board are going to be soaring quite soon. You see it at the gas pump. Well, this is what empires do, military empires. They bankrupt countries. Ask the British Empire. Ask the Soviet Empire. Ask the Roman Empire. It bankrupts a country but even worse, it rottens a country. There's a rot at the center of a country that comes with empire that starts to eat from the inside. I mean, this is what happened to the Romans. They were finally so disgusted with everything that was going on that they practically welcomed the invaders. I mean, this is the rot at the center of the empire that forms in these things. And the worse things get, the more tyrannical things get because they need more money. They're voracious. I mean, that's what the Federal Reserve's job is. Print the money. That's what the IRS's job is. Collect as much money as you can. Just keep it going. And really, when you stop to think about it, the predominant core feature of the U.S. government is the military. I mean, it plays as dominant a role as the military dictatorship in Egypt. I mean, okay, they're not running businesses here in this country like the military in Egypt is, but when you look at the amount of private sector businesses that are dependent on military largesse, it's phenomenal. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but it's absolutely enormous, the amount of private sector businesses that are dependent on this military contracting and supplies and so forth. And this is why, when they were bringing up all this big scare of, oh, the government's going to shut down, the government's going to shut down. I said last week, I said they're never going to let it shut down, either Republicans or Democrats, for any length of time, because they know, they're too afraid that people will figure out that this is the greatest thing that could ever happen. I mean, how long have we libertarians called for the abolition of, the Department of Education, Commerce, Labor, Energy, all these non-essential functions of government, abolishing Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole shebang. Now, granted, they don't call much of this non-essential, but it is. But we argue that this would be the greatest thing in the world, together with the standing army, bring all the troops home, close those 1,000 military bases, surrender the leasehold rights back to the countries where those are, discharge all the soldiers, put them in the private sector. Now, what do the statists say? Oh, this would be a disaster. Oh, the recession will be accentuated. Oh, the recovery will be interfered with. They don't understand, or maybe they do, that it's because the government is so large, it is such a parasitic leech on the body politic, that's what's killing the economic base of this country. That if you can discharge a large sector of this federal sector and put it in the private sector, it's actually a doubly positive effect. Because now the private sector doesn't have a huge tax burden to support the parasitic sector, but the parasitic sector is now in the private sector producing wealth. So you've got a doubly positive effect. You get to keep all your income taxes because you don't need it anymore to fund the welfare warfare state. That's a large amount of money. Calculate how much you pay in income taxes. You wouldn't be paying that anymore because libertarians say abolish the IRS, abolish the income tax, abolish the welfare programs, abolish the regulatory programs, beginning with the drug war, dismantle the military empire, the military-industrial complex. You don't need an income tax anymore. And then all of these people that have been discharged in the private sector, they're not in the leech sector anymore. They're now producing. So you have a doubly positive effect. You see, when they say, oh, there's going to be a disaster if the government shuts down, the disaster is only for the people on the dole in the public government sector who thrive off the government sector. People that are out in the private sector who are having their money taken away from them to fund all this junk, hey, they're not affected. In fact, if they get to keep the money now because the government's being shut down, hey, they're benefiting from it. It's the people that are receiving the dole, or the private sector businesses that are out there receiving military largesse or welfare largesse, or some mayor that expected his grant and aid, or, they say, oh, but you won't be able to get into the national parks or whatever. Well, then privatize them. But notice it's all this government sector that they put the fear of, whatever into people. Oh, the government's going to shut down. Oh, there's going to be a disaster. You want to know a good example of this? I mean, look at Fidel Castro. I don't know what the number is, but it's about like 98% of Cubans work for the state. I mean, Castro has carried the liberal conservative statist vision to its logical conclusion. He has Social Security. He has Medicare and Medicaid and a central bank, a Federal Reserve to print the money and so forth. He's got a large military. And he's taken from the rich and given to the poor to the extent that, he's taken all the houses and the businesses of the rich. I mean, isn't this the statist dream in America? When they talk about the rich, take from the rich, Well, Castro did it. And, of course, now everybody's poor because they're all trying to live off the 2% of people that are in the private sector. So, the other day, the Castro brothers said, we can't live like this anymore. So they're laying off 500,000 workers. Well, it's the best thing they could ever do. Put those 500,000 into the private sector. They'd become producers. I mean, it's really just a drop in the bucket, but at least it's better. But, what would the American statists say about that? Oh, no, Messrs. Castro, don't do that. That's going to interfere with your recovery. You need to keep those 500,000 workers in there. Oh, yeah, you've got to just keep going with your socialist dream. It'll finally work out. Well, this is all nonsense. But at least you can see that the battle we're facing, it's not just a philosophical battle with the statists, we libertarians. It's an ideological battle. It's an economic battle. I mean, we've got to battle these people on economic principles because they're over here saying the bigger the government, the more government spending, the more prosperity. We libertarians are saying, are you kidding me? That's the exact opposite. It's you that are causing the economic despair in Portugal and Greece and Ireland and the rest of Europe and here in the United States. Now, let me address another aspect of this. So you've got all this interventionism. You've got a huge standing military force, and they've got the ability. The presidents have the ability to invade all these countries. And look at the blowback from this. I mean, you've got this constant threat of terrorism. I mean, right? The war on terrorism has gone on for 10 or 11 years now, and they tell us it's going to go on indefinitely. I mean, it's like the Cold War, but better because there's always a terrorist that they never thought the Soviet Union would dismantle, but it did, and so they said, oh well, we got drug dealers, and ironically, Hosni Mubarak, the dictator of Egypt, he used the war on drugs and the war on terrorism to justify all his dictatorial powers as well. Now, and so let me address these dictatorial powers. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen where President Obama has caved in again to the statists with respect to the trial of Khalil Sheikh Mohammed, one of the the alleged 20 something or whatever hijackers on 9/11. Co-conspirator on 9/11. As you'll recall, after 9/11, President Bush ordered the Pentagon to establish a different system in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for dealing with terrorists. And this was going to be a constitution-free zone. Okay, that was the original idea, that you would have total power, dictatorial power. You don't have to worry about the courts, federal judges, Supreme Court. You establish your kind of system. And we've seen what kind of system that the Pentagon established there. And ultimately, the Supreme Court took jurisdiction of this, but, they still established a prosecutorial system in Guantanamo Bay to deal with terrorists. Now, it's a competing system. This is what's so fascinating, because we all know, or at least we should know, that terrorism is a federal criminal offense. Now, I know that the statists say, oh, no, Jacob, it can't be. It's an enemy combatant. We're at war. Well, you better get word to federal judges across the land. You better get word to the federal prosecutors and the Justice Department and to the Supreme Court, because they don't know that. Because they're looking at the U.S. Code, which is the book that's got all the federal criminal offenses, and they're saying terrorism has always been an offense here in the federal law, and that's where they're prosecuting people, hundreds of people. So, but what Bush did, he told the Pentagon, I want you to establish a competing system, and we get to pick. We get to pick whether to send a criminal defendant into the federal court system, where the Constitution applies, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendment, or into the Pentagon system, which is a Constitution-free zone. Now, what's really revealing about this is that the president gave the Pentagon carte blanche to establish any kind of system it wanted. I mean, it could do whatever it wanted. It essentially total omnipotent dictatorial powers to establish whatever dictatorial system, judicial system it wanted for prosecuting terrorists to compete against the federal court system. Guess what they did? Now, wouldn't you think that people who support and defend the Constitution or take an oath to support and defend the Constitution would say, well, we're just going to copy the principles of the Constitution because we believe in them? That's not what they did. In fact, they did the exact opposite. They rejected all of the principles in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution. I mean, for a while, they didn't even want habeas corpus. They were rejecting that, but then they rejected the presumption of innocence. They rejected effective assistance of counsel. They rejected trial by jury. I mean, trial by jury is like inherent to our system. It has been for more than 200 years. And they rejected that. They rejected right to speedy trial. So what were the principles they adopted? They adopted the principles that are inherent to the dictatorships in the Middle East that they were partnering with. Because you see, the Pentagon has long been partnering with the militaries of Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, training them, helping them maintain power. In fact, they entered into torture agreements with these people, whereby these people would torture on behalf of the U.S. government. And the Pentagon was working with them. You know, how do we get the logistics done? We'll bring a guy in to torture you. The CIA was part in all this. So this is what was really revealing. They established a judicial system to compete against the federal court system that rejected the principles of the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. Why? Well, bottom line, they want order and stability, the same way the dictatorships that they've been supporting and training for decades. Their mindsets were on the same path. We want order and stability. Jury trials bring up disorder. There's a possibility of an acquittal. We can't have an acquittal in a terrorist case. I mean, we can't let a terrorist go free. And, we know that here in this country, there's a possibility of an acquittal when a jury's in charge. There is no possibility of that in the kangaroo system that this Pentagon has set up. If the president says, I want a conviction, or he goes on TV and he and the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff say, this is a terrorist, like Khalil Sheikh Mohammed, I guarantee you there's not a military official alive that's going to acquit that person. His career would be over. I mean, he would know his career is dead. He's going to do what his commander-in-chief wants. He's going to satisfy his superior officers. That's the purpose of those kangaroo tribunals in Guantanamo. It's to ensure a guilty verdict. Now, that's not a judicial system. That's a joke. I mean, that's junk. That's pure junk. I mean, that's no different from the judicial system in Egypt, Bahrain, Venezuela, Cuba, and whatever. That's what has always distinguished our judicial system here in the United States. The constitutional system with rights and guarantees. Just this past week, the Justice Department was prosecuting a guy named Jose Posada Caviles for making false representations on his entry into the United States. This guy is alleged by the Venezuelan government to have been the terrorist that downed the Cuban airliner that killed lots of innocent civilians, including the members of Cuba's fencing team. Cuba's asked for an extradition. Venezuela's asked for an extradition. The U.S. government won't give it. And instead, they tried this guy for an immigration violation. Jury comes back in and acquits the guy. That would never happen with a military tribunal, because the military tribunal, the officers know, and the enlisted men who's ever serving as judges and juries and so forth are going to do what their superior officers want. Now, when you look at this type of system, and you realize that the military believes in that kind of system, and then you've got this enemy combatant doctrine where the military now has the power on orders of the president to pick up any American and label him a terrorist and cart him away. Carry him away to a prison camp, to a dungeon, torture him, abuse him, isolate him. That's now the law in this country. I mean, that's one of the revolutionary upheavals that took place after 9/11. The powers that exist within the military are now no different, really, in principle than the military has in Egypt. Now, granted, in Egypt they're using the powers against dissidents and critics and so forth. But that doesn't make a free society simply because we have a kind, benevolent military here and a president here that's not exercising these powers against critics and dissidents and so forth. The fact is that, and that's what the Jose Padilla case was all about, is that the Justice Department and the military fought hard to get those kind of powers, the Mubarak kind of powers, here in the United States. And that's what the enemy combatant doctrine was all about, that the war on terrorism is a real war. Now, in Egypt, the war on drugs is a real war too, and that's how they justified the emergency powers there. By the way, the emergency powers that lasted 30 years. And they still haven't lifted them. The people are demanding they be lifted. The military dictatorship says, no, we got a war on terrorism, we got a war on drugs. And by the way, that's the same rationale that the U.S. government, including the Pentagon and the military, says why we can't lift the enemy combatant doctrine and the Patriot Act and all these assaults on freedom. The TSA, porn scanning, body searches and so forth at the airports, because we've got the war on terrorism. It's emergency, it's gone on some 10 years. And of course, that's the benefit of the Libyan intervention, more threat of terrorism. And so here's the whole system. You see, you've got this huge empire. It's got bases all over the world. It invades countries. It sanctions countries. It embargoes countries. It interferes with countries' democratic processes. It ousts democratically elected leaders. It puts in brutal dictators. It supports dictatorships. It creates a lot of angry people who want vengeance. It kills hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children for the sake of regime change. Now, all that anger, that boiling cauldron of anger, finally erupts in terrorist retaliation. And then, of course, what do the statists say? Oh, it doesn't have anything to do with our empire. No, it doesn't have anything to do with those killing of those children. The Middle East people, they don't care about civilians or children or anything. They're different from us Americans. They're like the Vietnamese, the Asians. They don't have the same value of human life as we do, And it's all because the terrorists hate us for our freedom and values. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, every time you see any of the motivation for these terrorists, they're angry and they're outraged over what the empire has done to them. But it's a perfect scam. The empire goes abroad and stirs up all these hornets' nests, killing people, torturing people, abusing people, humiliating people. Then the anger rises, the terrorist blowback comes over here or over there. I mean, when they attack the USS Cole or the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. But then that threat of terrorist blowback is used to take away our freedom. And that's what the enemy combatant doctrine is all about. Our freedom, in the sense that now the Pentagon and the president have the same kind of emergency, so-called temporary powers that are inherent in these dictatorships. And then you've got these kangaroo tribunals where they've got the option of saying, well, if we like a guy, we'll send him into the federal court route. If we don't like a guy, we'll send him into the kangaroo tribunals to ensure a guilty verdict. I mean, this is not the America that our founding fathers envisioned. Is this the America you want? I mean, this is not the model of a free and prosperous society. And this is what we libertarians have been saying for decades. If you want a free and prosperous society, the solution is not just to get better people in public office. I mean, the Egyptian people are starting to realize this. Finally, I read in the paper where they're starting to realize that not all of them. Some of them, they're saying we need to get new people in the state universities, and we need to get new people in the military to run the show and so forth. Some of them are starting to figure out it's a systemic problem, that you've got a bad system. You've got a military dictatorship. That is not a good system. You got state-owned universities. That's not a good system. That what you need to start doing, you've got a controlled economy. You've got a welfare state. You've got to start thinking outside the status box. You cannot exist in the status box and then think, oh, I can make it work and so forth. You've got to get out of the box and start dismantling the system in favor of a free market system, a free market republic. And this is what we libertarians are doing. This is what distinguishes us from the statists, from conservatives and liberals. We want to get, it was wrong. It was just a dreadfully wrong experiment. for the statists to have imported the welfare state into this country. You know, it came, as many of you know, from the German socialists. That's where Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, the whole works came from. You know, go to the Social Security website, you'll see a bust there of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany. Why? Because he was the guy that brought Social Security into the German government. But the statists also brought the warfare state, the empire. You know, we haven't had time in this program to develop how that came about historically. You know, with the Spanish-American War, where the century-long obsession with Cuba came into existence, the denial of independence for the Philippines, and then of course there's World War II, where the ally of the U.S. government, the Soviet communists, was converted into an enemy after the war, and the Nazis were then made friends, and they brought a lot of the Nazis over and became partners with them. And then that was the rise of the garrison state, the national security state, the Cold War, the Vietnam War, Korean War, on and on. I mean, by their fruits you will know them, and this is what the statists have done. We, the libertarians, hold the future for the future of this country, our principles, our philosophy. This is why we keep telling Americans is that this is your real choice. And if you wait too long, it's going to be very, very uncomfortable. You got a country headed toward bankruptcy. You got a country that's headed toward denial of civil liberties. You got a country that's headed in the wrong direction. And the reason it's headed in the wrong direction is because of the welfare state and the warfare state. We libertarians say, let's restore the principles of liberty and limited government on which this country was founded. Now, granted, we all know the exceptions, slavery, tariff, lots of minor exceptions. But here was a society. They pointed the way to what we need to do. No income tax and no IRS. Imagine, for more than 100 years, because Americans didn't believe in it. They believed it was evil to be taxing people's income. No Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no public schooling. All voluntary charity and free markets. No empire. No going abroad, sending the military abroad in search of monsters to destroy, dictators or oppression or starvation. Open borders, telling people around the world, you want to escape your conditions of oppression, tyranny, you got a place where you can come and we won't forcibly repatriate you even though the rest of the world might. No big standing army, no warfare state, no military-industrial complex, no foreign aid, no all this string of domestic military bases and foreign military bases. You've got a peaceful republic, no gun control. You got a society of citizen soldiers, people that are well armed, they're training themselves, ready in times of peril to come to the defense of their country. And we've got an advantage in this country in that sense because all these guys are in the military that are all of a sudden discharged into the private sector. They don't lose their skills overnight. They still remain citizen soldiers. All the guys saying the 82nd Airborne Division. They still got their skills, but they're producing members of society. The chances of a country invading the United States are non-existent. There's no country in the world that's got that military capability, that has that financial capability. So you've got this giant military here under the so-called rubric of defense that is just going abroad and is abroad, stirring up trouble for us. It's just stirring up trouble, terrorist retaliation and so forth, killing all these people, assassinating people, kidnapping people, torturing people. It stirs up all that trouble, and then that trouble is used as the excuse to take away our civil liberties, infringe on our civil liberties, enemy combatant doctrine, kangaroo military tribunals. There's a better way, and that way is libertarianism. That's the battle we're facing. It's libertarianism versus statism. Welfare statism, warfare statism. This is the way, though, to achieve a free society. Dismantle the welfare state functions, dismantle the warfare state functions, restore a free society to our land, a peaceful society, a society that focuses on building a model for the world, a model of what a free and secure and prosperous and strong society is all about. That's the show tonight. It's nice to be back with y'all, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.